Sometimes we end up on web pages that have a lot of records on them, and we want to render complex controls for each one of those records. But that can be really slow in the browser, especially on mobile browsers or on people's computers that aren't super powerful. Is there something we can do about that? Let's mash on that.
Everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. I'm Dave Paquette, and here today with Simon Timms, going to teach us how to make those web apps just a little faster.
Look at us doing introductions with our actual names. That's nice.
Yeah.
I bet you somewhere there's a YouTube comment that we don't do that.
Probably.
Yeah. Anyway, so I ran into this problem maybe last week sometime. Somebody came to me and said, hey, we're building this form out and we want to render a bunch of records and have form controls for each record, but it's really slow when we get 200 records on the screen. And I was like, well, how many controls do you have? Well, we got about 10 controls per record. So like this was 2,000 odd controls being rendered onto the screen at the same time using Vue. And that was understandably slow.
Yeah, that's a lot of DOM nodes for sure.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of research on how to fix that, and there's a few interesting ideas, like using object.freeze to tell Vue that some things are not going to change, so it won't do the change calculations quite as frequently. But really the big suggestion that was out there was to make use of a kind of virtual scroller. So I did a little bit of a dive on that. And it turns out that my favorite control library, Vuetify, actually has one built in. So I thought I would just show how to use that. So this is sort of the default page here. So I've got about 5,000 records on the screen here, and it doesn't render too badly. But if you can see, if we can scroll quickly, it does get a little bit janky in places. So we'd like to find some way to make this a little bit better. This is unfortunately quite performant on my machine, but there are some places where it would be nicer if it was just a little bit quicker. So the way that this looks right now is basically I'm just rendering out a list here of items with just some random DOM settings on it. But there is a really handy little library or a little function that I'm going to pull in here, which is called a virtual scroller. And we'll just see how this works, and then I'll get into kind of the underpinnings of it. So I'm going to make sure we don't double iterate over everything there. And the closing tags for it down here, I think. So if I haven't typoed anything, we should get this thing re-rendered here. So I shrank this down a little bit on this screen. But this will give you an idea. Like this one scrolls pretty nicely too. And if we had a lot of items in this, so we were limited to 5,000 items before, about to go up to 10,000 items now in this list, then performance still stays really good, and it's really nice and smooth as we're scrolling through all of these items on here. So the way that this works kind of behind the scenes, which we might be able to kind of peek at if we dig in here to the DOM nodes. I know it's probably rendered pretty small. I don't know how to make this bigger.
And Control Plus.
Is Control Plus sufficient? Oh, it does. Okay, cool. So we can see here that what I've got is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 8 things here being rendered onto the screen. So if I highlight each one of those, it's one of those for each record that we can see. So if I was to just kind of step around here, you notice that I still have that same number of nodes. So what's being done is in the background here, as I scroll around, the calculations are being done for what should you see within this viewport, such that you were able to see just those items. So instead of rendering 7,000 or 10,000 items, we're only rendering like 8 or 9 items, whatever is visible to me right here. So it means that there's a lot fewer DOM nodes to render, so things work a little bit faster. And what happens here is it's just set the size of this container to be some outrageously large number, which is calculated by how big is each item, which in this case is, I think, 64 pixels, multiplied by the number of items, 10,000 items, which is how we end up with this number here. And as we scroll through this div, it's basically just changing the offset of the items that we see in here, and it's changing the value of the item that we have selected. So if we were to open this up a little bit more, let's see if we just open the content one here. So we can see this ID here on this record. Oh, as soon as I move it, it closes it, unfortunately. But it's basically just rendering a smaller number of nodes. So that's how this one is implemented. I have seen some other virtual scrollers like this, which are implemented slightly differently. So this one is adding and removing DOM nodes. Other ones will go and recycle DOM nodes. So it'll go and reuse this entire DOM node as you go through it, so you actually end up rendering even less. So that's an even more efficient way of doing this. But we implemented this on our project that was having problems, and everything sped up dramatically on it. It was much more easy to have people scroll through it, and the kind of really long list that we had that we were trying to avoid using paging on, because people were going through the list and doing data entry on it, so going from line to line, and we didn't want them to get to the bottom of this list and have to go to the next page and break their keyboard flow. So we were able to render this nicely, and as you can see, the code is pretty small for this.
That's awesome.
Really all we ended up adding here was just this virtual scroll here, and we give it a height, so that's kind of like the height of the viewport that we see into. And then this is kind of the only downside, is that you have to give it an item height, so it knows how to pre-compute everything. So everything in it has to be a consistent height for this to work. There are some other libraries I have seen that do this using kind of more calculated height. So if you have variable height items in there, then you can set it to auto, and it'll do some math as it does the rendering to figure out how many items it can fit on the screen. But there's obviously a little bit of overhead to doing it like that.
Yeah, virtual scrolling is a lot harder when you have variable height items, for sure.
Yeah, so it's nice to see that there's a little control for this, and like I say, there's another couple of libraries out there that I ran into, so I will link those down below in the show notes. But this is a really quick and easy approach to speeding up your application to make people's lives a little bit better.
Yeah, it's actually implementing virtual scrolling is a non-trivial thing to do, so it's nice when it's already there for you out of the box with whatever component library you're using.
Yeah, definitely. So anyway, well, thank you for joining us today. Remember to like, comment, and share, and we'll see everybody on next week's episode.
Bye.
Bye.